My guest today is Rob King, the Chief Data Officer at the Energy Department. Rob, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thanks for having me.
Today, we're talking about data, of course, because you're a Chief Data Officer. We're also going to talk a little about artificial intelligence. And I just want to tag back to something that I thought was really interesting. The recent survey from of federal chief data officers from the Data Foundation found that almost half of all CDOs are using basic or advanced AI, and almost all CDOs are considering adopting AI in their organization for various capacities over the next year. Interestingly enough, that's up from 45% having no AI responsibility in 2022. Now, I always thought the Data Foundation did a really nice job to kind of lay out some of those challenges around CDOs and their role in helping agencies kind of adopt AI. So I'm going to start there, Rob. Give me a little bit of sense. There is a lot of strategies around there, a lot of requirements from the White House. Talk about what the Energy Department is doing to increase the use of artificial intelligence and really focus on that governance.
Yeah, absolutely. And very timely and relevant topic. So at the Department of Energy, we have appointed a Chief AI Officer in January. That's Helena Fu, who's also the Director of Critical Emergent Technology. We also appointed a Responsible AI Officer, which is Bridget Carper, who's also one of my peers within the CIO. She's also the Deputy CIO of Architecture, Engineering, and Innovation. And then you have myself, the Chief Data Officer. And so the three of us are working in concert to ensure that we are taking a collaborative and integrated approach to aligning data into artificial intelligence and building that synergies between the role of data and data governance, and really being able to meet the spirit of the requirements of the AI executive order with the ability to interrogate our data for ethicality and bias as they are being imported into artificial intelligence models. The DOE, of course, is with our national labs and security sites, we are been pursuing artificial intelligence solutions for several years. While the term artificial intelligence has gained a lot of traction recently, it's not necessarily new concepts or methodologies. And so we've had a lot of advancements in our ecosystem and we're really now trying to come and ensure that we can back in the appropriate governance management, make sure we have oversight of our AI inventories and start to align. Do we have the right controls in place from a metadata management and from a training data standpoint, so that we can meet both the letter and the spirit of the AI executive order, while not just being compliance driven, but ensuring that we are doing the right thing to leverage those AI models to their full extent and make sure that we can accelerate the adoption of them more broadly.
There's a ton there around data. I'm just going to take a half a step back and talk just a little about your role with the Chief AI Officer, the Responsible AI Officer. This is adds some layers of probably complexity, but at the same time probably makes your life, hopefully, in Energy Department's life, a little easier, because you have kind of three people who are working on this, and poor Rob King's not wearing six hats.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I want to take a step back too. From a CDO standpoint, and I've been a CDO and a data leader at Homeland Security and Social Security Administration. I'm also the vice chair of the Federal CDO Council as well. And I work with a lot of CDOs and a lot of chief AI officers. Many of our CDOs, I think it's about 40%, are dual-hatted in this role. So we are all learning together. And we're looking for opportunities with the Federal CIO Council and the CDO Council for opportunities to collaborate as well, because there's such a tight alignment. You cannot divorce AI from data. And from where the CDOs sit, we're saying AI is just the most latest manifestation of the 20% outcome of how data should be governed and managed responsibly. I mean, if you want to call it predictive modeling, business intelligence, dashboards, it all comes back to, do we have the data pipelines that are well curated, that are discoverable, that we can evaluate for quality and competence? And now we're just happening to position for an accelerator into this thing that we're calling artificial intelligence. So, to me, and for the CDO community, it's an opportunity. And also, artificial intelligence is providing us accelerators for things we've been struggling with, right? How do we use AI to help us look for themes, patterns, usages in our data to advance, the classification and tagging of our data from a stewardship standpoint, so that we can understand, that whole full cycle. And we're calling things like data-centric AI to ensure that we're looking at ways to use non-invasive data governance approaches to help meet the mission needs of AI. So it's a great feedback loop. We're using AI to drive the maturity of our processes so that we can advance the mission adoption of AI as well. And yes, it does. The CDOs are in a unique position because we live by the tenets of it takes a village. It takes us working with policy and process, IT, now the chief AI officers, and the mission stakeholders, bringing us all together to really drive the outcomes of strong data management practices, now aligned to positioning for AI adoption.
I love the point about kind of your this idea. It's this full circle, right? Well, you're using AI to help understand your data, make your data better, to then so the mission areas and some of the back office areas can then use AI to use the data to make better decisions.
That's right. How do we make sure that we can use AI to make sure that our data pipelines are comprehensively informed, that they've got the accuracy, the appropriate tagging, the metadata associated to it, so that we can validate and substantiate the outcomes from a red teaming standpoint of our AI models. And so it's that synergistic approach that is really driving how does the chief AI officer, the responsible AI officer, and the CDOs work in concert for a cohesive strategy.
I imagine because every agency has more data they know what to do with. Some of it's structured, some of it's unstructured. And a lot of agencies, because data has been around for so long, Energy Department's been, an agency for 40, 50, 60 years. You have all this data. Where do you start from a CDO's perspective let's start with that, applying AI or applying tools, it doesn't have to be AI, to improve your data. And then how does that lead to other implementation opportunities?
Yeah. Another great question, because we can't swallow the elephant whole, if you will, when it comes to data, right? Data is at its core a mission enabler and accelerator. And so where we're driving as the inaugural CDO for the Department of Energy, I've been here since July, it's starting to say, all right, I have things like the Evidence Act, I have things like the Federal Data Strategy, and those give me some guidance, but I need to tailor them to the unique mission and priorities of the Department of Energy. So thinking about how do we look at what are the mission critical priorities of this department, and how do we get into that, and what are the right use cases, right? So we are going to measure what matters when it comes to the data and come up with use cases that are relevant to our secretary and depth secretary, that have cross component relevance. So we're looking at things like potentially how do we help with zero trust architecture in cyber domains. We know something like hazards analysis is something with our national labs and security sites is of high meaning, and it impacts all of them. And so can we find some opportunities? We also have some fantastic programs already in place that predated me, with some great leaders that we're trying to say, we take the tenet, don't recreate the wheel. In that case, who's already doing great things inside of the department that we can identify as that thought leader and emulate what they're doing. And so we've got some fantastic thought leaders that have done the right policies, processes, and technologies. So I'm trying to partner with them to understand how I can, scale and emulate their goodness, both from pure data management standpoint as well as artificial intelligence.
There's a lot that's come down the pike over the last few years. You mentioned the Evidence Act. You mentioned Federal Data Strategy. From a CDO's perspective, where are you kind of using those different pieces and parts to apply to Energy's data? let's talk a little bit about the governance side, right? How are you applying? Okay, what kind of governance council do you have? What kind of processes? What kind of, if you will, policies have you all put out that says, hey, when you have data, here's what needs to be in it at the minimum?
Yes. So when I arrived, the first thing we did was we need an enterprise data strategy. So we looked at our data governance board as it was, loosely concocted then, and we recharted it, restructured it, reframed it, made sure we had comprehensive representation. Coming back to data takes a village, it was how do we get all stakeholders who have, subject matter expertise, relevancy, participating. And then first thing we said is this data governance board, we need to build a strategy. We're on the precipice of completing that strategy. It's been published in a draft format to our entire DGB members for final review and edit. We hope to bring that to the finish line in the next few weeks. From there, we're already moving right into a 5-year implementation plan, breaking it down by annual increments to promote that strategy, recognizing that our science complex and our weapons complex and our environmental complexes have very different needs. So we're already looking at different stakeholder groups, different major data types, things like how does sensor data and the high volume nature of sensor data differ from our weapons data, which may differ from our science and research data, which all have some other overarching policies that impact them. So we're starting to look at, from an implementation standpoint, how do we account for different stakeholder groups who have to manage different types of data that are structured differently, to your point about unstructured and structured data that have different types of maturity in them. So how do we account for that and build that into our implementation plan is our next steps. We are identifying, I already mentioned a few strategic use cases, and we have one also that NNSA is leading called Project Alexandria around non-nuclear proliferation, and they're doing a lot of great things. So how do we take that and scale it for its goodness? And we have several others in that same category. So now it's, can't eat the elephant whole, but we are seeing some strategic use cases that are high importance. One of them are, what are our foundational AI models that we need? The AI executive order says our foundational models need to be published to other government agencies, academia, and industry for interrogation. So how do we then start to, with the chief AI officer, say, what is our risk assessment and what is our data quality assessment for being able to publish our foundational models to those stakeholders for that interrogation? So how do we start to align our data governance strategy and use cases to some of our AI drivers?
All right, Robbie, gave me a little news. I always appreciate that. A couple of weeks, we're going to get a new data strategy from Energy Department. I'd say, can I get a lot more details? But I know your answer will probably be you got to wait 2 weeks until it's final. But either way, it's exciting. And then I imagine you'll have an implementation plan behind it at the same time or shortly after.
That's exactly what we're doing. So the strategy is really that North Star, those goals we want to achieve. So we have 5 strategic goals, each with a handful of objectives and actions. That's the basis of our strategy. And again, our mission is so diversified across energy. We wanted to make sure that everyone could see themselves in the strategy. The implementation plan is going to be much more nuanced. And so we're now taking key stakeholders from our DGB organizations and building a team with appropriate subject matter expertise and mission representatives to build out that implementation plan and to account for those major data types that I spoke to earlier. The other thing we're starting to look at in our strategy is, what is the right ontology for data sharing, right? We should have a conceptual mission architecture that can show where we can accelerate our missions, be it the weapons side, the weapons complex, or the science and research side. Where can we build ontologies that say we can accelerate the mission because we're seeing like functions, like activities that, because of our federated nature of Department of Energy, we can break down those silos, show where there's that shared equity, and that could be some natural data sharing agreements that we could facilitate to accelerate mission, accelerate science and research, if you will. We think that actually coming back to AI being an accelerator, we think there's technologies that have materialized that through open source data, as well as some architectures of feeding our internal data, will actually build that tapestry of where we can better share data to drive accelerate mission and accelerate science and research.
All right, Rob, we're going to take a quick break. There's so much more to talk to and dig into, but as I said, we'll take a break and we'll come back. We'll continue our discussion. My guest today is Rob King, the Chief Data Officer at the Energy Department. I'm Jason Miller, and you're listening to the discussion Government Modernization Unleashed, AI Essentials, sponsored by EY on Federal News Network. Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion Government Modernization Unleashed, AI Essentials, sponsored by EY on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Rob King, the Chief Data Officer at the Energy Department. Now, Rob, before break, we were talking a lot about kind of your new strategy and the implementation plan. One thing that just kind of occurred to me as you were going through it is, does the data governance, does the strategy change? And I guess the better question is, how does it change now as we kind of get more into AI, as AI is going to play a bigger role throughout the mission areas, throughout the back office areas? How does that change how you think about it, how you work, obviously, with the Chief AI Officer and the responsible AI officer as you created the strategy?
Let me unpack that a little bit, because it's a multifaceted. So one of the things that excited me to join and become a leader on the Federal CDO Council was the opportunity to ensure that we have a workforce that is reflective of the data needs. AI, again, like I said earlier, is just the latest manifestation of what needs to be strong data management and governance practices. So, the federal government has recently focused a lot of its energy on, the data scientists, the 1560 job series. We have direct hiring opportunities. We also have 1550 operational researchers. But as I've been a data leader at other agencies, what I'm finding is that those resources, ops researchers and data scientists, we're seeing low morale and high attrition in those areas, because the training they've been given is about how to apply mathematical and statistical processes on data. The challenge we are, and I think it's pretty common across both industry and government, is our data has not been managed in a way that it is curated, well understood, discoverable. So we're seeing our data scientists and researchers spending a lot of time having to find the data, understand the data, validate it, and these are the things that should be done by, to me, a profession of data practitioners, data engineers, data stewards, data governance leads. And because we haven't professionalized those functions, there's no job series codes that say, what does it mean to be a data governance lead or a data practitioner, data engineer? It's kind of viewed as a pit stop in someone's career. And they're passionate about it and they're very strong about it, but they can't see a career path there. And so for me, as a data leader, I'm looking to say, what does it mean to professionalize the data management function, from CDOs down to data governance leads to I don't want to stay in the AI lane, but what does it mean to enable AI through good data management practices, so that people can come in at the start of their career and understand what does a path as a data practitioner mean, and how they see themselves in it, and that we can support their development and their career ambitions. So to me, that's a tremendous opportunity. And until we start to invest in those types of functions and resources, we're going to struggle with, the data science area, performing in an optimal capacity, because of those foundational activities and functions not being addressed adequately by people who really are highly experienced in there. So I hope we can find a ways to start to professionalize the data management. That'll lead to better data governance and management practices that will both, all of the consumers of these data pipelines. And AI is, again, the latest manifestation, but what about business intelligence and reporting and predictive modeling? And the analogy I've been using recently is, AI, from a football standpoint, right? AI is your skill positions. It's your quarterbacks, your running backs, and wide receivers, right? And they're the ones who are going to score the touchdowns and get the glory. I'm going to argue that your data management and your data practitioners, they're your offensive and defensive line. They're the ones who are moving in the trenches. They're not going to get the glory, but you're never going to score a touchdown. Your skill positions are never going to be successful without investing in that offensive and defensive line and winning in the trenches. And that's what data management is, right? We need to figure out how to describe the value of data management in a way that recognizes it's winning in the trenches to enable the skill positions to be successful. Because we're not there to be the AI or the business intelligence, but you can't be successful without us.
Rob, I love the analogy. It's only baseball season. Now I want to get excited for football season, yet we're still months away. So I have a few more weeks till training camp at least. But let me ask you, because one of the things that comes with this understanding the data, and I definitely will go to down the workforce path, where does automation can play a role? How do you kind of continue to mature these functions, not just from the people side, but the process side, to make sure that you can relieve some of that pressure on the people because they can only do so much in so many hours?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that this is a fantastic opportunity for the data management function because, doesn't matter which agency you're at, you're going to have to adopt your strategy into a landscape of point legacy technologies, right? You're going to have systems that have been around for several generations, and you're never going to have the money to modernize them fast enough to meet the demands. But they house critical data, and they may not, that data may not be standardized or rationalized, but it has information and intelligence you need to get out of those systems, and you have to align your business processes too. So, that's where automation comes in, and that's where we're seeing Gen AI and automation, APIs, and API first strategy as part of the modernization strategy. So we can't modernize our systems, but it houses information that is critical to informing decisions or models. We can look for automation to through an API first approach. We can align integration. We can use things like extract, transform, and load logic to say, that data doesn't live in the standardized manner, but working with the business and systems owners, we can transform that data to our standards so that we can consume it into various tools. And we can use APIs to really, once we build that logic over top of it, we can automate that function and remove that manual burden. And now we've actually got a roadmap for when that system is ready for modernization. We actually know the future state data standards it needs to conform to and adopt. So there's value proposition there. But having been at several agencies and talking to my peer CDOs, legacy data and the systems it lives in is a factor we're always having to give consideration to. We know we're not going to be able to modernize those systems, but we need to adopt them into our strategies to extract, transform data from them through automation. And then Gen AI allows us to quickly canvas both, with auto discovery tools, all that data, look for those patterns and themes, and to help us see where we have those common usages, that common classifications to better inform the use cases and the use cases that we need to drive for automation and pipe into our artificial intelligence models.
You bring up APIs. I just actually did an interview recently with the Marine Corps, and they have an API connection tool that they're developing as well. Where does that fit into your strategy? Do you have, as part of the strategy, and I know still under development, but an API first effort? Give me a sense of
Exactly. Any large federated organization, and I've been at Homeland Security and now DOE, in a federated organization, we're going to have to rely on API first. And there's so much value we can extract from an API first strategy from, hey, if one system, and we've seen that a lot in the financial procurement, budgetary space, in the legacy state, we would build each of those as individual interfaces. Well, we can build that API once, govern that API, and then we can scale and reuse it multiple times. The value proposition of an API first strategy from a development standpoint, from a governance standpoint, from a data management standpoint, simply makes sense. And we're driving towards that. At DOE, we're really focused in the first phases of our strategy implementation on metadata. We have data catalogs dispersed across the department, and we're not going to look for them to move off of any one catalog, but we do need to consolidate and rationalize and standardize data against them. And so APIs will be a natural approach for event-based triggers, pulling in data based off of the use cases, and being able to then understand data provenance and understand where that data lives, but then we can still consolidate it, transform it, and inform it in that enterprise standard capacity into the appropriate use cases. So lots of opportunities. I'm partnering very much with the responsible AI officer and our operational deputy CIO to start to build the foundation of an API first strategy, and learning from many of our departmental elements who have already built strong API strategies and programs already.
Rob, we got about a minute left or less. I just want to hit upon one last thing and maybe just give me a quick few comments. When we talk about data, we got to talk about cybersecurity. It's really important to make sure the privacy, security rules around it. What is your role when working with the CISO and others in the security world to ensure that, hey, we're not just throwing all the data out there, but we're putting some guardrails around it?
Of course, right? The CISO at DOE is he's a peer of mine, and we are tightly tied at the hip. There's a natural tension between the Evidence Act and the Federal Data Strategy to democratize our data, and then the CISO and Zero Trust to ensure that our data is well protected. And so we have to exploit that natural tension and to find that balance between promoting data as a strategic asset and securing that data. So ZTA, Zero Trust Architecture, the cyber domain, how we can start to do identity management in a consistent way so we can derive credentials. At Department of Homeland Security, I help facilitate moving from a need to know data posture to a share first with controls data posture. I want to see us follow a similar path here, which is how do we understand that we have to protect the data, but we can share it, building the right governance and security controls into the data to elevate it, the strategic assets, so those who need it can get timely access to it. And some of the technologies we're pursuing through ZTA are going to help enable that, because we're going to be able to do some derived credentialing and identity management tied to data security and control. So there's some opportunities there, but the answer is the CISO and I have natural tension, but we're very natural partners, and we can get some shared equity through that partnership to advance both of our programs and requirements.
And you probably know Paul Selby is also a big hair metal fan. So if nothing else,
absolutely,
you can talk about Poison and Rat and all the good.
See, I'm a punk rock fan. I'll go with the Ramones. So we got that natural tension, punk rock versus hair metal, and we have a lot of tensions to exploit, but we have a great relationship. We partner I'm meeting with him later today. We have a great relationship, and we understand that to ultimately be successful, we need to be working together closely, as any CDO and CISO should be doing.
Rob, unfortunately, we're out of time. There's so much more to talk about, but we'll have to have you back on soon. So let me thank my guest. Rob King is the Chief Data Officer at the Energy Department. Rob, it's always a pleasure to catch up.
Same here. Thanks for having me.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion, Government Modernization Unleashed, AI Essentials, sponsored by EY on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search EY.